maslama dječjim, rasti i cvijetaj zemljo radnih ljudi. I neka mir nad tvojim ljudima vlada, mir tvojim lađama napučini i tvome danu što se vedar budi. Rasti sretna da svi narodi vide, sa strana svih, sa juga i sjevera, kako se rađa i kako se voli, kako se brani zemlja proletera. Rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Tvojim ljudima vlada, mir tvom rudaru i tvome rataru, mir graditelju i tvom čuvaru, mir tvojoj sreći u vodi i u zraku, u pjesmi strojeva i u sjaju žita. Srcem Tita, rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. до самых окраин, южный гор до северных морей. Человек проходит, как хозяин необъятной родины своей. Тут жизнь невольна и широка, точно Волга полная течет. Молодым везде у нас дорога, старикам везде у нас почет. Страна моя родная, слава полковей, я другой такой страны не знаю, но я такой навижу человек. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой навижу человек. За столом никто у нас не лишний, по заслугам каждый награжден. Золотыми буквами мы пишем всенародный сталинский закон. Этих слов величие и славу никакие годы не сотрут. Человек всегда имеет право на учение, подвиг и на труд. Страна моя родная, слава ей, полковей, я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой навижу человек. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой навижу человек. Над страной весенний ветер веет, каждым днем все радостнее жить. И никто на свете не умеет лучше нас смеяться и любить. Но сурово брови мы насупим, если враг захочет нас сломать. Как небесную родину мы любим, бережем, как ласковую мать. Страна моя родная, слава ей, полковей, я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой навижу человек. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой навижу человек.
Greetings everybody and welcome along. It is the evening of November the 20th and we are here coming to you live at 25 minutes past 10, perfidious Albion time. Subject of discussion this evening will be the apparent granting of permission by the Biden administration and of course his puppets on a string, the Starmer gang and Mini Macron, to fire ATACMS missiles, Scalp missiles, Storm Shadow missiles into the territory of pre-2022 era borders of Russia. Now, this has been greeted with what I can only describe as a tidal wave of hysteria from all quarters. A lot of it generated by the ruling class in Britain themselves and through their own media. Every single newspaper in Britain today has been leading with the apparent warning by Russian President Putin that nuclear war is in the offing. And every single one of them has done this. The tabloids have all done it. The supposedly respectable newspapers have done it. Which leads me to think that, of course, we're in the middle of a deliberate attempt to construct a certain narrative. And this will largely fail, of course, because all of their narratives have fallen apart in real time due to the massive gap between reality and the fantasy version that they try to portray through their media. So what is actually going on? And what did the Russian government, what has the Russian government actually said, rather than what the British bourgeois say that they have said? So first of all, what has been granted now, where in terms of permission from the Biden administration? What has been reported in the US press is that the Biden administration gave permission to the Ukrainians to fire at the ATACMS missiles, of which Ukraine has between 50 and 60, according to most Western estimates, into the territory of pre-2022 Russia. Now, I should point out that some of these ATACMS missiles have already been used in attacks on Crimea, it would seem. Certainly the Storm Shadow missile has been used in attempted attacks on Crimea. Now, Crimea has, of course, been official sovereign territory of the Russian Federation since the 2014 period, when there was the intervention there partially by the armed forces of the Russian Federation and partially by defecting Ukrainian army units. Because one of the things that is forgotten is that there was a large-scale defection of Ukrainian army units to Russia back in 2014 in Crimea, which is part of the reason why the takeover in Crimea was so smooth. Now, they've been firing the Storm Shadow missiles they've attempted to fire them at the Kerch Bridge. They've fired them on targets in Crimea. So this is, in terms of attacks on by Western provided and targeted missile systems on territory of the Russian Federation, this has already been going on. It's been going on for quite some time. So Biden's apparent change in policy isn't anything like as dramatic as either the Western press wants us to believe, or that Zelensky, their puppet, is being told to make us believe, or quite frankly, that some people who should know better in the allegedly pro-Russian media sphere would want us to believe. So all of these missile systems have already been used extensively against Russian forces. They've been used against Crimea. And the Russians have had a good, well, at least 12 months, maybe a little bit longer, but at least a good 12-month period to learn the weaknesses of these systems and to either shoot them down using their very, very effective air defense systems or their electronic warfare systems. They've even captured intact a downed Storm Shadow missile that had been apparently downed by Russian electronic warfare. So like they'd caused it to drop out of the sky, not explode. They'd recovered it and taken it to bits and learnt how to bring it down. They've also recovered significant data on the ATACMS and the Scalp missile is the same design roughly as the Storm Shadow missile. It's just a French variant of this British design. So what they have announced is nowhere near as dramatic as the headlines would have you believe. They've held off doing it for now, until now. Why? Well, partially because the Biden administration was worried about escalating that far in terms of strikes inside of Russia. And so they've apparently changed their mind about this now. So why now? Why have they changed their policy? And does it stand any chance of affecting the military reality on the ground? So first of all, let's ask this question. Why change the policy? Well, part of this is related to military matters, but a large part of this is also related to PR matters. The military side of this relates to the fact that if you look at the progress made by the armed forces of the Russian Federation on the battlefield, and especially on the Donbass front, the Ukrainians have been taking an absolute kicking and losing a good deal of territory for the last 2 months. They've been having an extremely difficult time. Their front line has been forced relentlessly backwards. And even like pro-Ukrainian maps like Live Map UA, which you can find easily just using Google, even they reflect that the Ukrainians have lost an awful lot of territory in the main area of the fighting, which is still in Donbass. They've also got a severe problem in their Kursk incursion, which is that their attempt to seize the Kursk nuclear power plant failed, and failed badly, and that they are now throwing good after bad, shall we say, a good investment after bad investment, in pouring more men and more resources into this incursion to try and hold up the forces there rather than just withdrawing them. This is, by the way, what the Ukrainian commanders do every time they are on the verge of losing something. Rather than withdraw, they throw more and more men into into a meat grinder. Ended up losing far more than they needed to, and end up losing the ground anyway. They did this in going all the way back to the beginning of the war in Mariupol. They did this in the fighting with the Wagner troops over at Artemovsk or Bakhmut. They did this in multiple other sieges earlier this year as the Russians advanced. And they're doing the same up in Kursk now. And that might be part of the reason the collapse or the very, very heavy casualties being inflicted by the Russians in this Kursk incursion done by the Ukrainians, which, by the way, was planned by British and American officers. So this is their creation, just as the Zaporozhye offensive in mid-2023 was their creation. So you've got this assault which has gone wrong, which has failed to capture the nuclear power plant, which was the initial target, where they're losing thousands and thousands of men, apparently 31,000 at least killed and wounded. It's probably more than that now. That number is at least a week old. And so they need to do something to try and shift the balance in this equation back in Ukraine's favor. So using ATACMS missiles, Storm Shadows and Scalps in the Kursk region, it could be a way of them trying to do that. I don't think it'll make that much difference, but that might be one of the military reason why they've made this decision. In terms of the PR side of things, this does feed directly into the PR side. The Ukrainian so-called leadership, the Ukrainian puppet regime, has been having a difficult time public relations-wise due to the losses on the battlefield in Donbass and the heavy losses in Kursk and the failure in Kursk. So they need, that is Washington and London, need to do something to bolster the Zelensky regime. Now, more money might do it, but again, that's going to be difficult in terms of getting this through Congress, given that there's more in the United States, given that there is going to be more of a public controversy about this now, even more than there was already. More money doesn't really address the losses on the battlefield, and it doesn't boost Zelensky's flagging, well, beshitted reputation, shall we say. So what do you do to make it look as if the Z-Man is still a winner? Well, give him permission to fire off the big guns at the Russians. That's what that's what you do. So to bolster Zelensky's beshitted image with Ukrainians, they'll give him permission to fire these 3 different varieties of missile into the territory of Russia, where they will mostly be shot down by Russian air defense and electronic warfare systems. But it provides a good headline for 24 hours. So those are the reasons why I think they've done it. There is, of course, the other reason, which is more of a strategic than a tactical reason. So you've got the 2 tactical reasons, which are the bad losses on the front line, the very negative situation that the Ukrainians find themselves in the Kursk region, and the associated bad PR for Zelensky, all of which the Biden gang hope that they can turn around by changing this policy. There is the bigger, more strategic consideration, though, which is what this does to any potential negotiation. And this, they hope, I think, will severely damage any potential negotiated settlement, or damage any potential for a negotiated settlement. Bear in mind what I have said on numerous occasions before, that what they want to do, and again, we're having another discussion with a friend of the program, Kit Clarenberg, tomorrow in the latest of our news series entitled Decline and Fall. Kit's latest piece for the Grey Zone, which we'll be talking about tomorrow, is all about the London government's, the Starmer administration, their plan to keep the war going as long as possible, even via guerrilla warfare means, terroristic means, etc. So the aim of London, and the aim, I think, of the permanent state in Washington, which is there regardless of which administration is in, is to keep the war going, not allow any negotiated settlement to be reached, keep Ukraine fighting as long as possible, even though they know damn well that this is a losing game now. They know it's over. Every military man with half a brain in Washington and London will know that they can't possibly win this now. It's gone wrong. There's no way back. So, but they don't want to admit it. They don't want to have to come out and admit publicly that they have lost, because that'll be extremely damaging, and they're pathologically incapable of dealing with the fact that they have gambled so much and lost it. So what's the plan? Well, keep the war going as long as you can, by any means necessary. And that means, of course, sabotaging any potential negotiation. And how do you do that? Well, you make it difficult, more and more difficult, for any negotiation to be conducted, but on the Russian side. Forget the Ukrainian side. The negotiation would never be in the end, between Ukraine and Russia. It would be between the United States and Russia. That would be what the negotiations would be. So with regards to Trump, and anybody who watched the video I did last week on Trump's cabinet appointments know my opinion on Trump's actual chances of settling the conflict. But let's assume for a moment that those in the Biden gang and their allies want to make sure of that. Well, how do you make sure of that? You throw a load of missiles into Russia to do what? You amp up Russian public opinion against a negotiated outcome. You strengthen the public opinion inside Russia that is hostile to any negotiation with the West. And you do that by, again, firing more missiles on targets inside Russia. You make it more difficult for the Russian government to actually engage in any negotiation. And that's the way you keep this war going. One of the ways you keep this war going as long as is possible. The other way is, of course, underwriting the costs of the Ukrainian regime. That is where the $3 billion a year from Britain comes in. So there's a curious story in Britain today, and again, I'll be talking about this in more detail tomorrow with Kit Clarenberg, that the British government is considering scrapping several very expensive naval vessels, possibly including Britain's now largely useless aircraft carriers, but continuing in for as long as it takes, in the words of Keir Starmer and expenses fiddler David Lammy, to throw $3 billion a year into Ukraine. Now, why? What does that tell us? So they're cutting things like naval vessels. They're cutting apparently also like some of the more expensive helicopters that the Navy and the Army have. So that doesn't tell me that this is Britain. Keir Starmer starts up with a rousing chorus of "Onward, Christian soldiers marching us to war," and he's going to reenact the siege of Sevastopol. That tells me that what the British ruling class's strategy is carry on outsourcing. So you're cutting the amount of military equipment that the British armed forces actually have, whilst at the same time you're throwing $3 billion into Ukraine. That is basically to continue with the strategy that has been waged over the last 10 years, which is outsource the fighting. The British will do the training, provide a certain amount of equipment, but the fighting and the dying is going to be done by Ukrainians, and the $3 billion a year is essentially to prop up the Kiev regime and to make sure that it carries on with the fight. So that's the British defence policy now. Strip the ranks of the Navy and the Air Force of actual equipment and use the savings to throw into Kiev to carry on with the outsourced war, because that seems to be the policy. So prop up Kiev, keep Ukrainians fighting and dying, and keep doing that as long as you can possibly get away with it. That's the Starmer government's policy. That is what I think in the end will be the policy that Trump will agree with. No negotiations, continue the war via the underwriting of Kiev, but get the European governments and the British to underwrite Kiev. And the clowns in charge of France and Germany, no matter, by the way, whether it's Olaf Scholz or Friedrich Merz, will agree with that. They will agree with that. This outsourced war has been their number one policy priority in terms of defense, so-called defense strategy, for a decade now. It represents a 30-year-long investment by not just the US, but the British, the French, and the Germans as well. They're not giving it up. They're going to make the Russians, or try to make the Russians, fight their way across as much of Ukraine as possible. And so the Russians will be forced, effectively, to seek the total collapse of the Kiev regime. And as I will reiterate what I have said before, the aim is to make the Russians have to spend as much in terms of lives and money as possible in ending the war, and ending the war via having to completely destroy the Kiev regime, which I think the Russians in the end will do. They will have to do it, because they can't negotiate with this entity in Kiev now, because it has no independent existence. It is purely a creation and a puppet of the British and the Americans. French and Germans a little bit as well, but London and Washington are the two key players. And if London is going to be providing $3 billion a year in perpetuity, it's London that's going to be making a lot of the calls with regard to how the Kiev regime acts. So this is the plan. This is all part of the same process that's going on. And as to, let's just deal also with this question of the Russian nuclear doctrine. Now, as to Putin threatening nuclear war, Putin did not threaten that. So all of the headlines you've seen in the British press today about Putin threatening nuclear war, and all the airtime that Sky News and the BBC have devoted to it, it's all based on a lie. Putin didn't say that. What he said was, in the event that the British or the Americans or whoever use missile systems like we've been talking about to hit targets inside the Russian Federation, that an appropriate response will be forthcoming. That's what he said in the interview where he was specifically asked about that back in September. And he made a similar comment back at Valdai. And what does he mean by an appropriate response? It means he's not committing to what kind of response they'll get. But if we think about it this way, the Russian nuclear doctrine, which has been updated recently, and I'll just talk about the update here. The update for the Russian nuclear doctrine does change it slightly, but not dramatically. What it does is it includes Belarus under the Russian nuclear umbrella formally. Now, the Belarusians and the Russians have had this Union State Treaty since, well, going all the way back to 1997, which was always meant to be a comprehensive treaty which included defense, but it was only recently brought fully into existence in terms of agreements and in terms of the integration of the Belarusian and the Russian armed forces into a joint structure. So this updated Russian nuclear doctrine, which I've read some of because there's only partial translations available. If anybody fancies doing a translation job on the whole document, be sure to email me, because I can't seem to run the damn thing through the translation through the Yandex translator. It won't read the PDF properly. What are you going to do? But I've read elements of it, and I've read the explanation of it on the Kremlin website. So they include Belarus inside the Russian nuclear umbrella, and what they say in that doctrine, in the bits of it that I've managed to read so far, is that a nuclear response will come in the event of the large-scale conventional attack on Belarus or Russia that again threatens the integrity of either state. So if let's just say that the Poles go insane and decide that they're going to try and invade Belarus or something, and they're going to take Minsk, then that's at that point the Russians may consider that they would want to respond with nuclear weapons because the integrity of the Belarusian state will be threatened. So what that's designed to do is to basically smack the idiots in Warsaw in the face and to put them off any thoughts that they may have inside their crazed, scrambled brains of launching some kind of campaign to recreate the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth by invading Belarus, which some lunatics in Poland will be considering. This updated nuclear doctrine is aimed at them. It's also, of course, aimed at the US and the British and the other Western Europeans, without whose support the Poles couldn't possibly do any of this. So it brings in Belarus formally, makes all those arrangements that Putin and Lukashenko have been talking about for months and months into a formal military doctrine. Now, does this mean that because the Ukrainians froze some of their limited supply of ATACMS missiles into, say, the Kursk region, which is what is being reported as having happened, does this mean that the Russians are going to nuke London tomorrow? Well, I'm sorry to disappoint those of you out there who wish to see perfidious Albion sink beneath the ocean waves, but I don't find that a very likely or credible outcome. Why? Well, simply stated, the Russians don't need to do that. So what? Ukraine's got maximum 60 ATACMS missiles, smaller numbers of Scalp missiles and Storm Shadow missiles. So say they fire all those off. Again, the Russians have the capability to shoot most of these down. The Russian statements made today about the first ATACMS strike say that they shot 5 out of the 6 down. So how's that going? How's this going to change the military reality? How is firing these off going to get us to the point where the Russian government considers that it's a serious threat to the integrity of their state? It's not going to get to that point. The Russians don't need to respond with nukes, either nuking Kiev, which is what I've seen some idiots suggest, or nuking London or Washington, or setting off one of their nuclear torpedoes in the North Sea and flooding England or something like that. They don't need to do any of that. They're winning the war. They're winning the war. Let's just emphasize that point again. They don't need to take such drastic action because none of this is going to threaten the integrity of the Belarusian or the Russian state. What they will do is they will increase in the intensity of their attacks inside Ukraine itself. So they are already crippling Ukraine via going after the energy infrastructure. They are already crippling Ukraine by inflicting gigantic numbers of casualties, which even, again, Western press is admitting to all of this now. New York Times is admitting to it. Even the Telegraph in Britain, this arch-reactionary batshit newspaper, is admitting to the gigantic amount of casualties being caused in, well, all the way across the front line. So the Russians are winning the war. Everybody knows they're winning the war. So they don't need to take such drastic actions as nuking somebody. It doesn't make any sense. So the Ukrainians will fire off their limited supplies of these ATACMS missiles, Scalp missiles, Storm Shadow missiles. They will largely do it to little effect. And all it will do is make sure that the war continues and more and more working class Ukrainians who are press ganged into service will die. That is what the effect of this will be. And it will not, unfortunately, lead to divine punishment for Keir Starmer or Joe Biden or Emmanuel Macron. If we want some kind of criminal tribunal for them, we're going to have to do it ourselves, everybody. The Russians will continue with what they've been doing. They will continue to push increase the pressure on the Ukrainian regime. Ultimately, though, I think that what this shows is that the Ukrainian regime cannot and will not negotiate because it has no independent existence. It will have to be the case that the Russians will push it all the way to the point where it is completely destroyed. Because, again, you can't negotiate with something which has no ability to conclude an agreement with you. The moment Zelensky tries to show any independence of action, Zelensky is a dead man. His own partners in London and Washington will have him removed. If he's lucky, he'll just be removed. If he's unlucky, he gets the full Ungo Din Diem treatment. So there'll be no negotiation with Ukraine because Ukraine doesn't have a government. It has a colonial administrator in the form of the British and US appointees who are running a puppet regime where Zelensky is there as their frontman, who is fed lines to say. Now, final point on this, and I'll conclude here, is just on the North Korean question. The consistent reports that the DPRK has deployed forces into Kursk are, simply put, lies. It has no truth to it. Now, I've seen channels, mostly that the moron that runs the military summary channel, who apparently is pro-Russian but babbles away and repeats this NATO propaganda endlessly. Let's just deal with what the arrangement between the DPRK and Russia actually is. They have their joint defense agreement signed, and now that's gone into Russian law. So if the Russians did wish to call upon the services of DPRK forces, under Russian law they could do so because, of course, the Ukrainian forces, under the direction of London and Washington, have launched an invasion inside the internationally recognized territory of the Russian Federation. Again, they're not going to, though, because let's first of all deal with a significant problem. Russians and Koreans don't speak the same language. Now, it's true that for many years in the Soviet period, Korean officers and Korean forces did do joint training exercises with Soviet forces. They've only just apparently restarted that joint training, though. So how are you going to incorporate into the armed forces of the Russian Federation 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 100,000, a million? Wouldn't matter what, depending upon which stupid estimate you look at. How are you going to integrate Koreans into the Russian armed forces when the two speak different languages? How are you going to integrate two different, wildly different military doctrines with each other? They'll have some similarities because both come out of the experience of the early to mid 20th century Soviet Red Army. But again, different military doctrines, different languages, different kinds of officer training. Again, they've only just started the process of training DPRK officers in the Russian military academy. So how are they going to integrate what? Let's say 30,000 Korean troops into this? It doesn't make any sense. This story never made any sense. It's all bullshit. It was all bullshit designed to justify the Kursk incursion retroactively, dreamed up by the British and the Americans. So quite why so many supposedly pro-Russian channels are running with it, I don't know. Maybe it's a delirious fantasy. Maybe some of these people aren't as pro-Russian as they like to pretend they are. Who knows? But consistently, some like these supposedly pro-Russian channels either scream that Putin should hit the nuke button immediately, or just repeat endlessly NATO propaganda in a completely brainless fashion. And these people should basically best be ignored. If you're repeating stuff that is quite obviously false, quite obviously manifestly false like that, then you must be either smoking something or you're a very useful idiot for the NATO PR machine. So, enough about NATO's falsities. Now let's pause and take some questions. Right, going back up to the top. We're going to do some greetings. So hello to Christopher Rogers. Hello to Banana Bender. Hello to Enigma. Hello to Daniel, who's out there in the West Country. Jacob the Squirrel. Good evening to you. Says, any Brits watch this documentary on BBC Two tonight about the soldiers used as guinea pigs in nuclear experiments? Goes to show Remembrance Day is just a bullshit show. And indeed, Jacob the Squirrel is completely right. They did nuclear experiments on British soldiers. The Americans did the same thing as well, of course. I believe they also did chemical and biological weapons development research on armed forces personnel. So again, you're like most armed forces personnel then and now, to the people who run the army, the officer corps, and the government officials, you're just bullet sponges or lab rats. That's how they see us. Hello to Roddy. Hello to N. Minkowski. Hello to Robert Svorinich, who comes to us from the wasteland of Staten Island. Hello to Almir, who joins us from the once and future Constituent Republic of Yugoslavia, that is Slovenia. Hello to Harold. Hello to Bishi, who joins us from East Anglia. Hello to Abtin. Hello to Svetlana, joining us from Moscow. Hello to Ash, down under. Hello to Medic484, who's joining us on Rumble and comes to us from Holyoke, Massachusetts. Good afternoon to you. Hello to Veshna Pamet. Hello to YAI Ain't Cool 46, who's on Twitch. You can join us on Twitch. Tonight we're live on YouTube, Twitch, X, Instagram, and Rumble. I am going to add more platforms as I get set up on them. And to answer a question from from Twitch, I'm going to be uploading the videos to Twitch tomorrow. So I didn't realize that they went up live and then disappeared again. So I will start uploading to Twitch. Hello to DL Sandro Nush82. More Time Needed, who comes to us from the mighty Skegness. Hello to Nikolai Visaraunovic, who comes to us from New Zealand. Hello to Luca, joining us from the land of delusions, otherwise known as Perfidious Albion. Yes, the land of infinite delusions, as it turns out. Nush82 enjoyed the video with Isco Lat yesterday. That's a very good interview. Stand by for a sequel to that coming up very soon. Good evening to Jenny, who joins us, and thanks to you for being our moderator for this evening. Vishnu Pamet says, so none of the ATACMS reached their target and were taken out by Pantsir and Triumph S400s. That's what I saw as well. Okay, scrolling through here. Hello to Agricola. In response to your question, yes, the playlist will be changing soon when I get around to it. Hello to Tim Gray, who is with us. Apparently Tim Pool is spinning the North Korean soldiers hoax. Well, Tim Pool is a fucking moron, who's paid to be a moron. So what do you expect? Hello to Poltroon. Hello to Jessica. Pittsburgh Dude. Paul McCord, good evening to you, comrade. Hello to Aziz. And hello to Davey. Svetlana says, no details on the ATACMS, but I can tell you that on Sunday a Patriot missile hit downtown Odessa and knocked off course, I assume, 10 dead. Are they reporting that in the Western media? No, they are not. What a surprise. What are Kowenki Dinky says, any video showing supposed North Korean troops with Russian troops are in fact Southeast Asian troops, I believe from Laos, that were doing joint training many years ago. That was floating around. That was another fake video that came out recently. Hobbs says, I agree with Kit Clarenberg's take. There are 100 million DPRK troops now in Russia ready to fight in Ukraine. I heard 200 million. The North Korean army is numerous and is invincible. Let's go through some comments. Hello here. Hello to Marius. And we got 440 of you watching on various platforms tonight. So be sure to like and share the stream if you haven't done so already. Hello to those of you watching on Instagram Live as well. Right, okay. So let's carry on with the comments here. Where is Zelensky? What is his location? The same bunker in front of a green screen that he's been hiding in from the very beginning. People saying that Zelensky's run away to Poland. Well, he might be visiting Poland. I mean, the fact is, though, that his handlers aren't going to let him leave the scene like that. Now, he may be, maybe they keep him in Western Ukraine. I mean, I heard that they want to basically make sure that he's out of Kiev for a while because they're afraid of some like massive Russian assault on Kiev. But we are yet to see that. D. El Sandro says, they way overextended in Kursk. It's taking Russia a long time to get them out of there. What's my take on that? The Ukrainians threw a lot of their best men and equipment into Kursk, and the Russians are taking their time getting them out of there. Because the Russians are following the same tactics they've been following now effectively for many, many months, which is move slow and do as much damage to the enemy as possible whilst minimizing your own casualties. Now, the Russians stopped them getting to their real target, which is the Kursk nuclear power plant. And once they'd stopped them doing that, they then solidified the front line and focused on killing as many of the Ukrainian forces as possible, which they've been doing. So they don't need to do some big dramatic move to hurl the Ukrainians out when they're killing so many of them. So that's my reasoning as to why it's taken them a while. Also, there's a lot of there's a lot of forces in Ukrainian uniform in Kursk. Quite what the national composition of that force is another question. And I've heard that there's a lot of Americans, Brits, French, and Poles involved in that. So, I mean, I'm going to keep a careful eye on the Russian media to see if any revelations come out of that as to just how many non-Ukrainians were involved in that Kursk operation. My guess is quite a lot. Veshna Pamet says, watch all the ideological Nazis run to the EU. Well, plenty of them are here already. Just scrolling through the comments here. Almir says, I have real doubts about the Trump administration ending this war. I will be very happy to be wrong. They won't end it. Even if Trump was serious about wanting to end it, he can't. Because, like, on what basis is he going to bring it to an end? And how is he going to bring it to an end when his entire foreign policy team consists of foaming at the mouth lunatics who have actually been calling Biden a pussy for the past 2 years and demanding that he go further in arming Ukraine? When Waltz, his national security advisor, is on record as basically wanting Poland to be the next in the firing line. Michael Tracy reported on that on his Twitter account. I believe it was earlier today that Waltz was on record as saying, oh, well, we've got to arm Poland because Poland's next. Now, translate that out of bullshit into real language. And what that means is there's a certain view inside the political hierarchy of the United States and in Britain who think that they can push Poland into being the next sacrificial victim to keep the war going by getting the Poles to do something. And at that point, I would profoundly hope that the Polish people would assert themselves and throw out the stooge regime that exists in Warsaw, because they do not want to be sharing the fate that the poor Ukrainians have had inflicted on them. Let's just scroll through the comments here. Hello to Sid, who's joining us. Right. Rista Kostadinov says Trump could also do the same thing he did in Afghanistan, shake hands with Putin and Zelensky and continue the war, leaving it to his successor. I don't think it's going to last that long, to be honest. I don't think they're going to get that option. I think the conventional war will come to a close next year. I know it's a risk making predictions, but I'm going to make one anyway. The conventional war will come to a close next year. The unconventional war will continue for a good while longer, just as it did after 1945 as well. And that's what the British are planning for. Hello to Robert in Detroit, who has joined with us. Sid says, same playbook that the Nazis dug into during the later stages of World War II, leaving so-called werewolf squadrons behind to carry out guerrilla war behind enemy lines. Very true. Blake Davis says, Galloway and Ritter think nuclear threat to the UK is very real. Alex is right and they are wrong. Yeah, I am right and they're wrong. To be quite blunt about it, I'm not claiming to be a fucking genius or anything, but I certainly know more than Galloway. Galloway, a man who, I've met on a couple of occasions. I was a member of his party, but Galloway talks some pure shit sometimes. Let's be completely honest. And as for Ritter, well, I would say treat anything he says with extreme caution. He has a tendency. I mean, I've interviewed him years ago now. Back when I was doing the podcast with Layla, we interviewed him. But I find that he has a tendency towards hysteria, to be quite honest. And he's got hysterical on numerous occasions. And to be quite frank, I don't trust it. I don't trust what he says, to be honest. Just the way I don't trust what a lot of these military experts say. I found them useful on certain areas, but very not useful when it comes to political judgments, which is fundamentally what we're talking about here. We're talking about not only a military judgment, we're talking about political judgments. And, if I read what the Russian government has said, and, I'm not an expert on battlefield tactics, but I know who's winning this war, and I know who is losing it, and I know who's got the most to gain. And I can see that the Russians don't have anything to gain by lobbing nukes at Britain. They have nothing to gain by doing it, so they're not going to do it. Galloway and Ritter get themselves together and wind each other up to the point of hysteria. And also, let's just be honest, Ritter is going around saying that, Tulsi Gabbard is some fighter against the deep state when she's in reality, a long-term career US military intelligence officer to this day, and has been wearing different costumes for years now. But I think that her true self is a rabid supporter of US imperialism, which she is, and a rabid supporter of the genocidal Israeli regime, which she is. So what, that's your fighter against the deep state? No. Again, I'm right and those two are wrong? Yeah, I am. If I get blown up overnight, I'll call you and apologize. Okay? No, Biden has not declared. Well, Judith says, does this mean that Biden has declared war on North Korea? In a strict sense of the term, the war between the US and the DPRK has never really ended because there was a cessation of fighting, but there was no peace deal done to conclude the Korean War. So in that sense, there's still an active war between the North and the South, and the South has no independent existence. There's still an active war on paper between the US and the DPRK. But again, if Biden tried to invade the DPRK or any American president, that would be a war that they would lose, just as they would lose if they tried to do something stupid against Iran. Yes, and as what a Coinky-Dinks comment implies, they will. The Russians are also winning the economic war, and as Kit Clarenberg has stated, the Europeans are quietly trying to reestablish relations with the Russians. They're also buying more and more Russian oil. There's again like doing it via India or via Turkey. So like this is a farce. The Russians don't need to do jack shit to Britain. They can analyse the situation with regard to Britain, and they know that the British will fall over the edge of a cliff pretty damn soon anyway. British economy is basically a series of bubbles balanced precariously on a series of even greater debt bubbles. You don't need to do anything to this country. You don't need to nuke it. Its own ruling class will crash it over the edge of a cliff pretty soon. Blake Davis says, Russia controls 18% of Ukraine. Is that winning? It is when you've wiped out most of Ukraine's fighting capacity. Yeah, we are all brought up, those of us in the West, with the idea that everything's about dramatic acquisition of territory. I mean, one thing I do agree with somebody like Andrei Martyanov, and I've found his books very useful in terms of understanding Russian military doctrine and the very strong influence that Nazi military doctrine has on Western militaries, is that think of war in terms of dramatic acquisition, seizures of territory. The Russians, being heavily influenced still, and correctly it would seem, by the thinking of Clausewitz, focus on annihilating enemy forces whilst minimizing their own casualties. And they've done that incredibly effectively, given that the casualty rate is 10-1 in Russia's favor, at least. So, yeah, you control, 18% of Ukraine, but you don't need to go and try and occupy vast amounts of land if your opponent keeps sending huge numbers of his forces into meat grinders that you set up so that you can then kill huge numbers of them. So why would you need to go off storming into the center of Ukraine, risking huge casualties of your own, when the idiots who are opposing you obligingly send all of their forces right into a death trap? So again, our thinking on this as Westerners has been all wrong. Like, the Russians have sat back and slowly advanced when they have killed enough of the Ukrainian forces that the Ukrainian forces just collapse and have to withdraw. And the people organizing the Ukrainian forces, the NATO officers, have played right into the Russian way of war and have not learned anything, it would seem, from the previous 2 years. Almir says, so many dead and wounded, so many refugees, so much destruction. Sometimes I'm too focused on geostrategy, imperialism, and industrial capacity, and I forget about the human element of all this too. The human element is a horror show. It's an absolute horror show. And it should not be forgotten. I mean, we focus rightly on the 45,000, 50,000, tens of thousands who have been killed by US imperialism in occupied Palestine. And that is entirely correct that we do so, but the gargantuan number of casualties inflicted upon the Ukrainians at the behest of imperialism. Again, like, the Russians saw many ways out of this conflict, and it's one imposed upon Ukraine by US imperialism and Britain and British imperialism. The likes of well, all of the leaders of the US and Britain should be put on trial for war crimes, for what has been done in Palestine, but also what has been done in Ukraine, because it is a horror and it is of their creation. Andrei Martynov is far superior to the military summary channel. Yes, he is. I completely disagree with a lot of the man's politics, but in terms of his analysis of military matters, I do find him much more useful than the clown that runs the military summary channel. NATO lacked any kind of strategy. That says, what a coinky-dink, and that is correct. Cobb fan says, even if Ukraine was supplied with all the munitions needed, they fail because they are running out of soldiers, which is the Russian aim, to have them literally run out of men, which is what will happen. I mean, eventually, even with all the terror units that they've got blocking Ukrainian forces from retreats, and the executions of those who try to retreat, the NATO-trained Ukrainian forces will just fall apart because they're going to run out. They're literally running out of men, and eventually there will come some kind of breaking point, and the question is then, how fast do the Russians want to pursue them? Vishnu Pamet says Danny Haifong is another clickbaiter. Yeah, I am allergic to clickbait. I mean, you just look at the title of the videos I put out there, the opposite of clickbait, because I don't think it doesn't do the audience any favors. It doesn't. Like putting out some hysterical bullshit, saying, West destroyed by Putin's chess moves. Picture of Putin playing chess. Some hysterical headline screaming that it's all over. Russia wins, Ukraine collapses, and then of course the war's still going on the next day. To be honest, it just makes you look bloody stupid. And I wish people stopped doing it. But then again, that's the nature of social media algorithms. If you're trying to make your channel big, you put some stupid headline on there, and get Pepe Escobar to go on there and tell you that he's got an exclusive source inside the Russian military hierarchy who's told him that they're going to nuke Delaware to respond to Joe Biden or something. Hello to Lurtis, who joins us from the frostbitten north. Edward, joining us from Latvia, said, you should mention with Isko Lat how it is a tragedy that the literal guardians of Lenin, that is the Lettish riflemen, Latvian riflemen, are now Russophobic Latvian Legion supporters. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm very glad, one of the reasons I'm very glad I did that interview was because, of course, you don't know that there was, of course, a communist revolution in Latvia immediately after October 1917 that was crushed by British imperialism, something I didn't know about. Barbara Red says, there are millions of Koreans living in Russia. People don't realize Russia is a multi-ethnic society and they all speak Russian. That's true. I mean, Far Eastern Russians, of course, are as much Russians as the Western Russians, but the idiots in the Western media don't realize that. They see like a Korean-looking guy in a Russian uniform, assuming he must be from North Korea, whereas, of course, he could be from Far East Russia. But again, the Western media is not there to tell you the truth. They're there to fill your head with bullshit. Always has been. Scrolling through here, I'll be putting the Twitch URL in up on. I'll be doing some better advertising for the different platforms from tomorrow. Just going through some more comments here. Nush82 says some of these Russian channels are guilty of disseminating this North Korean soldiers narrative, likely to be proxies of US propaganda. I agree with Nush there, very much so. What do I think of Isaac Asimov? Asks Jacob the Skrill. I enjoyed one of the Foundation novels I read a while ago. To be honest, I it's so long ago since I've read it, I don't know how I would respond to it these days. So when I've gone back to fiction reading again, I'll add Asimov to the list and go and be able to respond to you properly. Okay. Juan Guaido, currently in South Beach, Miami. Well, will Zelensky be joining him? That's the question. Jonathan Collins asks, I've heard there are thousands of Colombian mercenaries over there. I read an interesting post about that the other day. Yeah, Colombians and Brazilians, an awful lot of them. I mean, I don't know how much money they're being offered, but there's an awful lot of them getting blown up over there. But there's a lot of, from what I can tell, and then again, somebody with more knowledge of the Colombian situation might know this better than I do. There's an awful lot of Colombians who've gone through the military or who've been in paramilitary units, who basically became soldiers of fortune. So a lot of them looking for a payday went over there. I don't know what the Brazilian situation is, but I don't know whether Brazil has national service or something. But yeah, a lot of Brazilians have popped up over there as well. Some of them seem to be connected with like ultra-reactionary political networks as well. So that might be part of it. But I'd be curious to know how many have gone over there and fought and died. There was, of course, quite a number of Colombians who fought on the other side as well. Colombian communists who went to fight for the Donbass militias back in the day. Hello to Comrade Ian Foster, who's joined us. Milovana Kurovia on Twitter says, can NATO countries, US and UK, manage to afford two fronts, Israel and Ukraine, at the same time? Can you break down the differences between British and US priorities? That's an interesting question from Milovana. The British and the US priorities are often the same because there may be some differences in emphasis. I think that the Brits are even more invested in Russia, in defeating Russia than the US is. The US is pretty invested, but the Brits even more so. The Brits hope to manage to carry out some serious looting of Russia if they can get the Russian government to collapse, which they have failed to do. The Brits also have big investments in Central Asia, and they're worried about being muscled out of that by Russians and Russia and China. So for the British, I would argue that the Russia project is a little bit more important for them than it is the US. The US, the two more important locations are West Asia and, of course, Southeast Asia. More specifically, their attempt to cripple or destroy China. That's more important. Now, there's a big debate goes on inside US ruling class circles as to where they should prioritize. The Biden administration's approach was to say, we'll do everything. They didn't count on October the 7th, and they didn't count on the eruption in occupied Palestine, though. So that's been an additional problem for them. The reason why I have said before that there is no essential change in the calculations made by the Biden administration and the Trump administration is that both will defend the Israeli regime to the absolute bitter end. There'll be no compromise on that point. Because, again, to reiterate what we have said before here, if the Israeli regime is defeated, then that's it for the US in the region. which means no ability to dominate Lebanon, no ability to sustain their presence elsewhere in the region. It means that their compradors in Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf states come under threat. It means that the US's ability to influence global oil markets is compromised as well without the relationship with the comprador regimes in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. Means basically that the US imperialism is severely damaged. So I think for them, for a certain faction in the US, the West Asia is the priority much more than Ukraine is. The other faction, though, thinks that the whole thing's about China and that they should seek to go in hard into Taiwan. They're limited, though, by the fact that they can't really do much in terms of war fighting with any of these places. Try and take on Iran militarily, you'll lose. The US will lose. It can't do it. Try and do the same thing with the Chinese in Taiwan. They can't win that either. I mean, I know that there is a certain point of view which says the US Navy, particularly its submarines, can do a lot of damage to the Chinese, so they could score something of a win that way. But then again, the Chinese have a gigantic number of shipyards which can replace any shipping they lose in a war very quickly. The US, in terms of its naval shipyards, I think only has one that's functional. So again, like in terms of the capacity to fight a war, the US is just running out of resources. Now, to answer Milovana's question properly, for the British, it's all about, I think it's really about Ukraine over everything else. I know that there are some in the British government that want to prioritize West Asia, but I think that the big priority for the British is the war on Russia. The British ruling class are still very conflicted about China. They don't really know what to do. On the one hand, they want to do business with them, and on the other, they want to join the US and trying to destroy them, which is reflected in like Starmer and Lammy's bizarre schizophrenic performance in front of Xi Jinping the other day. So the US moving towards the priority being more sustaining themselves in West Asia and moving to take on the Chinese. For the British, it's more about Russia, and that's why they're so fanatical in trying to keep the war going at all costs. I will be going further into the exact relationship between the US and the Europeans, though, because there's some very interesting things to study there in terms of the capital flows from Europe, from America to Europe and back again, and the trade relationship as well, in terms of understanding US control over this bloc. So I'll be coming back to that, but I hope that this answered some of your question. Just going through the comments here. Hello to the James Awesome, who joins us from Occupied Island. Good to have you with us. Nush82 says Ritter is the same kind of reactionary as McGregor. I don't think he's quite as reactionary as McGregor, but he's still a reactionary. And yeah, quite frankly, not somebody whose word I would trust on much. Going through some comments here. To answer Luca's point, yeah, Andrei Martynov on certain military questions, I think he's good. Like again, I found his book "Losing Military Supremacy" to be pretty good. I enjoy the fact that he has done a good job debunking the anti-communist ravings of McGregor about the Soviet army in the Great Patriotic War as well. Jenny says with reference to Gabbard, she's just a different faction of the deep state. Yeah, and she always was. That's the point. Sid says, people with no association with intelligence don't get nominated for positions like Director of National Intelligence. Yeah. This is the point. Like, she's had a career in military intelligence. That's her official job title in the Army National Guard is an intelligence-related position. So this is a career spook here. It's a career spy. So like people attaching themselves to positions she took like 4 years ago in the presidential election. How real were those positions? is the question. I'm going to guess not real at all. This is much more of the authentic version of her that's around now. And all that Biden administration stuff about like putting her on a watch list and stuff like that, that was political theatrics. If the military actually thought that she was some sort of security risk, she'd have been drummed out of her role. If she was actually opposing the deep state, to use that term, a term I don't necessarily agree with, it's just the state. If she was actually some kind of threat to the intelligence agencies, then she wouldn't have kept her position as an intelligence agent, would she? Which she did all the way through her presidential campaign in 2020. So it's clear to me that the role she was playing in 2020 was as something of a spoiler candidate. That's obvious now. And if she has any real opinions, it's much closer to what she's saying now than what she was saying back then. Notice that she took apparently anti-Israel positions whilst never breaking friends with New York's leading kosher dildo salesman, Rabbi Shmuley Botek. Like, she never was denounced by him whilst taking an apparent anti-Israel position in 2020. Why? Chances are he knew very well, or his handlers did, that it was all fake. It was all bullshit. And I think that's exactly what her 2020 campaign was. Bullshit. It was I think the one thing I would agree with the Sanders people from the time who were saying she was running as a spoiler to siphon votes off Sanders, well, that's probably true. Not to say Sanders was any good. My opinion on him is very well known. But I think she was running as a spoiler. And I think she was running as probably part of her intelligence role. Tim Gray asked, does Biden even know where he is? By now, he's probably at a central location in the Amazon rainforest. Okay. Jacob the Squirrel says, talking of politicians wearing costumes, Farage wore wellies and a waxed jacket at the farmers' protest this week, so I'm expecting Starmer to rub soot over his face and wear a helmet with a torch on it. Nah, he'd never do anything that fun. At least Farage does the dress-up game well, you know? Ben asks, just as there's never been an end to the US DPRK war, isn't it possible there will never be an end to the US-Russia war? US has all these young men and no jobs. Well, EU has all these young men and no jobs. Well, the EU isn't a state. Some people who run it would like it to be. Now, but can the Germans and the French and the British just declare a draft and pack all these guys off to war? Well, maybe they could for a while, but it wouldn't be sustainable. Like, if we look at how serious are the British in terms of marching off to war with the Russians, not serious in the slightest. They're not reindustrializing. They're only doubling down on outsourcing the war. They're actually cutting, as we've covered earlier, the amount of military equipment that could conceivably sustain a fight against the Russians, and just pouring endless amounts of money into Ukraine to keep Ukrainians fighting. They're doubling down on outsourcing and deindustrialization. Say the same problems exist in Germany and France. These aren't countries that can go and fight the Russians, nor are these countries are hysterically afraid of the draft. I mean, the reason why Rishi Sunak went out and said, "I'm going to bring back national service," when they were running that election, was because that was a maneuver designed to sink his campaigns, to kill it. It wasn't a maneuver designed to court popularity. They knew that would sink like a stone. That's why he said it, so they could get Starmer in. But Starmer's whole purpose is to basically continue business as usual. So they can't launch a massive mobilization effort because they haven't even got the industry to equip the men who they would mobilize, assuming anybody even turned up. They can't do it fundamentally. But to answer Ben's question, it may well be that there's no formal treaty signed. That could be true. As I say, there'll be no formal negotiation to end the war. there'll be a tacit recognition that the war is over when the Russians have destroyed the Kiev regime, but there'll be no recognition of whatever solution the Russians forced there. And there'll be a recognition of a Ukrainian government in exile, and they'll be running permanent terror operations against the Russians. But the Russians dealt with that when the British and the Americans did it through the Chechens, and they'll deal with it this time as well. Nush says, Noah from Midwestern Marks did a wonderful interview on the Holodomor mythology. Very educational. Yes, and if you enjoyed that, check out the episode I did with Comrade Slava, also from the ACP a while ago. It's up on the channel. Just scrolling through some comments here. Yeah, Almir's point is correct. Andrei Martinov is very good at military stuff, but has very bad political takes. If he's talking about, if you're an admirer of Donald Trump, then you're getting conned, basically. Donald Trump is a career con man. You know, this is what he's always been. This is his real talent, and you got to admit he's been very successful at it. People getting taken in by Trump, like, you're either a fool or you're a scoundrel. So I'm going to go with those who are knowledgeable and are too intelligent to be taken in by this scam. They're scoundrels, not fools. And that goes for a lot of people. Oh, and if you're praising Candace Owens, well, I would severely question your reasons as for doing so. She's a gigantic fraud. Putin issues disastrous checkmate move on Biden. Clickbait. Yes, indeed. Maria says, I remember when Escobar did an article about the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, which was filled with fanciful details that came from his own imagination. It was like fan fiction. Yeah, well, I think some of these so-called multipolar journalist types spend all their time propping up a bar in, in Almaty or somewhere, or Moscow. Then after they've drunk their 10th Bloody Mary for the morning, then they decide to write an essay, which is basically like an extended ramble based on a series of fantasies, or a conversation they had with a drunk Russian military officer at a bar. You know, I could go down to central Manchester right now, sit in the Wetherspoons and drink a number of pints, and then have a really interesting drunk conversation with some guy and write it up tomorrow. It'd sound really great in my own head. Wouldn't necessarily be a reflection of reality, though, would I? Okay, so Irish Comrade asks, I'm relatively new to academic Marxism. Do you have any recommendations? Books, videos, etc.? Well, what I can do for you, and by the way, we're not academic Marxists here. I would never seek to describe myself as an academic Marxist, simply because academic Marxism is largely a fraud perpetrated by useless Western leftists. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post the my party's reading list up here in the chat in order to address your question, the James Orson, and you will find a whole reading list on there which you should work through in your own time, from beginners to advanced learning on there. So take a look at that. Most of the sources are available online, and pick up at the beginning and start working through. Also check out our Telegram channel, where you can pose questions as to your reading in our forums, and experienced comrades can answer those questions. Apparently Marcianov's also been babbling on about how the Europeans, they don't recognize you. I haven't watched his channel for a while. He's on about the immigration thing. Well, there's a reason why France is is full of Africans. It's because the Africans were forced to go there by the activities of the French. So shut the fuck up, if you're on about that. It's like, why do you think people come to the West? They're forced to come here to seek work. And it's like, and they're forced to come here because the West went there and continues to go there and destroy their countries. I mean, Andrei as well, Andrei Martynov is sat as an immigrant in America babbling on about how immigration to Europe's bad. What the fuck are these people smoking? Seriously. Seriously. Like, pull your head out of your ass, man. You know? How can you sit there as an immigrant in the US going on about how immigration's bad? Revealing something unfortunate there about yourself, I think. Rista Kostadinov says, I don't know why Brian from the New Atlas constantly call Hamas a Western proxy. Because they fought Hezbollah in Syria. Well, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Syrian government and the Iranians have all turned the page on that. I find it unfortunate that Brian can't turn the page on it either. I don't know why he's so fixated on that. I think, to be honest, it's a case where he's been wrong so long he refuses to correct himself. I don't know why. I'm not going to speculate because I can't get inside the man any further because I can't get inside the man's head. Edward says the Latvian SSR is a case study of the failures of revisionism because there wasn't a real struggle after 53 in Latvia against petty bourgeois nationalism, and it came back with a vengeance. And I would say, from my reading of things, Edward's assessment there is correct. Going through here. Well, what I discovered in my interview with Isco Lat and from my wider reading was, of course, that the Baltic states joined the USSR because of revolutions that took place within them, and they requested to join it, to join the USSR. I didn't know that because that's never mentioned in the overwhelming majority of British histories of that period. That there was a working class revolution in the Baltic states, and it was a revolution that was fought over a period of 20 years from the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 through to the end of the 1930s and the overthrow of the fascist regimes there and the successful joining with the USSR. That was all done by the working class in a heroic fight against fascism. Not that we would ever know that if you're looking at British or American historiography. Just going through... Is it possible to do an episode on how Singapore wages an imperialist campaign in South Asia by exporting its capital? I'd need to do some serious reading about Singapore. I've never done any real research into it. So I would have to take that away and look into it before coming back to you. But I'm happy to take it on as a suggestion. Hello to Alan, who joins us from Peachtree City, Georgia, USA. Stig Pedersen says, what I find most disgusting by far is the absolute cynicism of the West when it constantly calls for Ukraine to mobilize. Utterly despicable and criminal. British newspapers and politicians are the worst. Well, that's an entirely correct point of view. Just going through here. Rista Costadino says, what I find so funny about West relations with China is that they don't have the guts to say, no, we don't respect the one China policy anymore. And they send C-tier diplomats to say that Taiwan is independent. Yeah, because they know very well the strength of China and they want to retain plausible deniability. They also know that their elements in the ruling class still want to do business with China. And the ruling class is divided on what to do, which is why they keep contradicting themselves. Sid Hatfield says, this realization about Gabbard causes me to question all of the people who carried water for her and associated with her a few years ago. Well, let's be fair. Some people got taken in by the act. I mean, I only did more digging into her career recently. But you dig in and you find that somebody who's been in army intelligence for that long, and by the way, has deployed to some pretty nasty conflict zones as an intelligence officer. So like in terms of going on maneuvers with the US Army, So is the US Army going to take somebody who's like radically against the policy they're enforcing? No, no. Like, this is somebody who is operating as an intelligence asset all the time, whether she's a congresswoman, a director of national intelligence potentially, or whether she's in uniform. She's on duty as an intelligence officer. She's a spy. So getting taken in by that 4 years ago because she endorsed Sanders in 2016, which again I think was part of her intelligence officer duties. She'd given no indication prior to 2016 that she had any sympathy for social democracy whatsoever. So, but falling for the act in 2020 is excusable. Falling for the act in 2024, when she's been on record as being in favour of the genocide of the Palestinians, continuing to carry water for her then is inexcusable. It's inexcusable. It's you being willfully blind to who this person is. Mr. Kostadinov says, did you see who is the new Deputy General Secretary of NATO? I guess I should become NAFO guy because she's from my country. No, I haven't seen that. I mean, I did apply myself, but apparently my CV got rejected. Sid says, well, there are a lot of skilled workmen here, but American capital has no interest in production anymore. Myself, I can still operate a lathe or a mill. Interesting. But yes, American capital has no interest in industrializing America. The only way you're going to get reindustrialization in America is when the current ruling class is overthrown, and the building of socialism can begin. Trump's reindustrialization plans will all fail, just as Biden's failed, and the masses in America will, well, many of them, millions of them, already know this. Remember, the non-voting party in the United States got 88 million votes, which is more than either of the candidates formally standing for the Democrat and the Republican Party got. So the actual winner of the contest was the no voting, the no votes candidate, the none of the above candidate. Judith Osterman repeats something about Ritter, which is, yes, that is true. Risto Costadino says Orban might be a clown, but he's smart enough not to burn bridges with the big powers. Well, like, he's a reactionary, and I can't stand the man's politics, but he's not stupid in terms of his read of the Hungary's chances in the world. Like, he knows very well that he would be stupid to blow up his relations with the Russians. And again, like, he knows very well that he'd be stupid to blow up the Hungarian relations with the Chinese. So he's not going to do either, which again, like, puts him a cut above most of the politicians in the West. But then again, Hungary's in a bit of a different position with regard to the Western European powers. It's a smaller, less powerful state. Now, Orban has certain ambitions with regard to capitalism in Hungary, but he can't realise those without relations with Russia and China, so he's not going to turn his back on them anytime soon. Hopefully, this is part of the tension which causes the EU to implode, and hopefully that comes soon. Veshna Pamet says, who was Rishi Sunak again? He was an Indian John Major impersonator who played the part of Prime Minister for a while. Not that it matters. Yes, Kiwi Corner 888 says, Tulsi, I am against war against Russia, but pro-war against China and stand with Israel. Genocide is all right by me. Yeah, if you, that is a summary of her position, which is accurate. She's also all in favour of a war in Iran. So make of that what you will. What I make of it is that that's somebody who is running a con game on people. Sid Hatfield says, some of my family members on Trump, they talk about him as if they're describing a religious experience. I have faith in Trump. Well, to be honest, I mean, to be fair, that's true, but same thing with Sanders, same thing with Corbyn, same thing with these left-wingers who people like attach a huge amount of faith to for no reason. Like, oh, Corbyn's going to come back. People keep saying that. Where's he going to come back from? Like he was some, leading a lost tribe out the fucking desert. So again, like, it's not just Trump. I mean, yeah, people in the US, responding to Sid's comment, it's true that like a lot of people do put like a religious amount of faith in Trump, but people on the left are just as guilty of that of that. It's desperation. It's a phase that we're going through. Like, people are so desperate for change, any change, that they put their faith in charlatans, be they charlatan social democrats or charlatan petty nationalists, all of whom will ultimately fail to deliver for them. Is Escobar the guy who was also saying that the Israelis detonated a nuclear weapon in the atmosphere over Iran? If that's true, he really is a clown. I didn't see that. He has said some other equally clownish things today, recently though. But I didn't see his claim about Israel detonating a nuke over Iran. That's a new one on me. Just scrolling through the comments here. If I don't get your comment, then but you want me to pay attention to something, best thing to do is to email me. Mutanda says, Grey Zones seem very enamored with Gabbard still. Surprising. Yes, I find that strange, given her very, very public statements in favour of the genocide. I don't know why they're still falling for the con. I mean, I know that she's been attacked in the theatre of American politics as a pro-Russian and shit like that. But again, that's theatre, that's theatrics. It's not real. None of it's real. And you should be pointing that out. So no idea why the Grey Zone would waste time on such an obvious intelligence asset as Gabbard. Not sure why they'd bother. But I haven't watched their video, but very strange that they're doing that. Jacob the Squirrel says, Britain had the option of blank votes on ballot papers. If there was enough blank votes, there would be no government. But that option was removed a few years ago. Yeah, because the blank vote would have won. Jimmy Dyer has gone full MAGA. Yeah, well, there's a reason why I don't watch his fucking program anymore. It's because I find him unbearable. Like, again, like, there's people out there saying stuff about Trump which is just transparently untrue. They're saying that Trump's going to do things that Trump himself hasn't even claimed he's going to do. So, again, ridiculous nonsense, best ignored. What's my opinion on whether Greenwald is an intelligence asset? I don't know about that. I don't know. Greenwald isn't Greenwald basically a libertarian type? I mean, he's anti-China, so take his opinions on China with a bucket load of salt. He's done some good journalism though on other matters. I mean, with a guy like that who's a bit more serious, I would just say, yeah, watch his stuff, read his stuff, but bear in mind, this guy's basically like an American libertarian. So you have to bear in mind that that is his perspective and that's what he's going to be saying. So don't take him seriously when it comes to anything he says about China or any communist country, because you're going to be getting a lot of anti-communist crap. But on other stuff, like, he's been consistently good, to be fair. David King says, deporting 10 million Latinos might cause issues. Yeah, so for that and many other reasons, they're not going to do that. I mean, there's all this shit being talked about, like Trump's going to do this, Trump's going to immediately deport 10 million people, shit like that. No, because if they did that, what would happen? Well, you would end up hitting the profits of a lot of major American corporations. who employ these people who Trump apparently is going to get ready to, to sling in the deportation wagons. So again, like look beyond the advertising. Look at the reasons for migration into the United States. Look at the reasons why the ruling class still wants it and needs it. And ask yourself, well, what's the actual policy? Never mind what Trump says. Look at what his administration ends up doing. Where's the wall? We're going to build a big, beautiful wall. It's going to be the best wall ever. It's going to have a golf course right in front of it. Where's the wall? Was it ever built? A stretch of it was. Was there any serious efforts ever put into building the wall other than a PR stunt? No. This deportation drive, though it is going to cause a lot of problems, it's probably going to cause a certain amount of deportation. It's going to cause misery for some poor bastards in the United States who are going to be on the receiving end of some very nasty treatment from the police agencies. But the mass deportation thing, I don't think is going to happen, because there'll be too many objections from too many very powerful ruling class interests. That's why, not out of any humanistic concern. That and the fact that it is likely that the Trump administration is going to pursue even more reactionary militarist policies towards Central America, South America, and the Caribbean nations, which will cause more migration, and which, out of certain countries, migration is, of course, always welcomed when it comes to Cuba or Venezuela or Nicaragua, because it's a weapon used against those countries. So Trump, people want to fall for the con. Trump is nothing else if not a very, very good shit talker and a good con man. So he comes in promising all this stuff, going to build the wall, going to have 20 million deportations a week. No one will deport more than I will. Now join me and Joe Rogan as we do this commentary on a UFC match. People project onto it. People want to believe it for a variety of reasons, but I don't think it will happen. Nothing like what he describes, what he says will happen. And Trump is, as much of a manipulator and a con man on the immigration question as Obama was. Remember, the kids in cages thing, that's an Obama policy. Border militarization, building increased militarized outposts across the US-Mexico border, that's a Clinton policy. That was Bill Clinton 30 years ago. There's complete continuity in immigration policy in the United States, and it's based around securing the labor required by American corporations that can be hyper-exploited, so making sure that labor comes in, and then having a regime of terror you can impose upon those workers. Once they're in the United States, you can hang the threat of deportation constantly over their heads. That's what the purpose of the American immigration system actually is. Donald Trump will not change that. Because, again, American corporations want that labor and need it. He's not going to defy them. Neither is J.D. Vance. Neither are any of the other fucking clowns and crooks he's got in his administration any more than Biden or Obama are going to change the double game that's going on the immigration question. Right. Okay. So I'm going to bring things to a close for today. We are at 526 of you watching at the moment. Thank you to everybody who's tuned in. So I will be back again tomorrow at 3 p.m. British time, and that's with our friend Kit Clarenberg in our next episode of Decline and Fall. So join me again for that. The audio of this will be uploaded to the Patreon site tomorrow. Thanks to everybody who's watching on the various different platforms, and I will say good night to you and throw you back over to a musical outro.
noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și sfut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a